It's fascinating why there's a moment of pause and reflection on a thing that your mind starts to run away with, like, oh wait, why did I never notice? And what was going on? And I wish I had this human alive in my life to be able to ask them. So I do think part of the story is written out of this desire to know a question that I will really never have answered. It was my way of sort of creating my own answer. I'm Serena Burdick, a literary fiction author. I live in Western Massachusetts. This book is based off of a photograph that was taken by the artist Man Ray of my grandmother and his wife Juliette. They're masked and they're nude and they're in an embrace. I have the photograph on my wall, and my grandmother died when I was 18, and I really didn't get to know her as an adult. I didn't ask enough questions as a kid. I didn't think to. She was just my grandma. And so I was looking at this photograph one day and really curious about the story behind it, but also deeply sorry that my grandmother had passed and I couldn't ask her. I was really curious what led these two women to be in this moment together, and how did they feel with a male photographer? Did he ask them to take their clothes off? Did they want, like, what was going on for all of them in that moment? And how comfortable do they feel in what they were choosing to do with each other or with the photographer? And I just started weaving a fantasy in my head about who these women were, what the moment before the camera clicked looked like right before that, like what had been happening right before that moment. How did they feel being nude, embracing as women? It was the late 40s. There's a male photographer there. I just wanted to explore that. And so from that, my book is entirely fiction. The characters are not my grandmother Juliette, they're just fictional women with their own total story, but the inspiration came from that image. My love of writing started at like 5 or 6 years old. Like, I was really, really into storytelling at a young age. I was obsessed with reading, and I went to this incredible little elementary school that had an amazing creative writing program within the school. All the kids had to publish their own books with this little press that the school had. And so part of what your goal was to complete your semester in from nursery school on through elementary school was writing and publishing little books. And I loved it. I thought I always wanted to tell stories and write poetry. Back when I was a kid, I did a lot of poetry writing, and writing was always a part of my life. Even when I went to pursue acting, I used it as, it was a therapeutic thing for me, writing. I didn't think of it as a profession, but I always had to do it if I was in an emotionally difficult place or struggling with something. I would sit down and I'd write. I would write about the thing I was going through, but not really in a journal form. I would write it in fiction form, as if I was telling a story, but it was all sort of the true, dramatic emotions you go through in your 20s. And so I had actually written this 200-page personal, I don't know what it was. It wasn't really a novel, it wasn't anything, but I remember that was the first time I'd really put a chunk of work down, not just bits and pieces. And that was way before I ever started actually trying to write an actual novel. And even then, I never thought of writing as a profession. It never even crossed my mind that that's a thing people did for a living. So yeah, it was a long time coming, and I was 40 when I published my first book. So I was an actor for 10 years before I started writing. I loved to tell stories. That's how I thought I was going to be telling stories. And I had lived in LA, and then I moved to New York. And at a point, I just realized that the material that I was being given to audition and read wasn't work that I wanted to do. I didn't think it was well written. I didn't feel like I had any control over it. And so I ended up going back to school at Brooklyn College and decided to have my thesis be a novel, and really loved the ability to completely control the entire story myself and all of the characters and the narrative. And then I realized that that would be a way that I could tell stories. So where I get my inspiration from outside of writing is just the humans that I'm around. I'm deeply interested in people and their stories. I ask a lot of questions if I ever enter a new space, and I want to know everything about a person. And when I was on the subway this morning, I look around at all of the people and the thousands of stories that are packed into that one train car. And my mind is always running away with, like, who are they? What's happening in their life? Where did they come from? So this specific novel that I'm putting out, A Promise to Arlette, the relationship, it's about a strong female relationship between the two women that are in the photograph, is based off of a relationship that I have had with a woman. It was not a sexual relationship in any way, but it was a complicated relationship in that I was the one who very much desired the friendship and sort of always sought it and wanted it, and was very fed by this dynamic, lovely woman who I could never understand and always wanted to be closer to. But there was definitely a dysfunctional sort of obsession on my part with this other woman who I idolized, and always was sort of seeking approval and wanting their attention, and in a sort of desperate and dysfunctional kind of way that I couldn't ever quite figure out. And so this relationship really does unpack that sort of personal side of it for me. The three main protagonists of A Promise to Arlette are Ida, who, when the book opens, she is a bit of a mess. She's a mom dealing with all of her guilt and tragedy of the war, also trying to fit into, she's from England but lived in France and was part of very wild, avant-garde, super open sexually community, and she is now in New England in the 50s. And I really like the idea of juxtaposing like those two worlds, which were drastically different. She doesn't fit in, and she's trying to figure that out. So we go back and tell her story when she met Arlette, who was the courageous, dynamic, confident woman that Ida idolized and sort of wanted to, emulate. And then Sydney, her husband, was a soldier that Ida meets in the south of France during the war. They fall in love. And he is, in present day, he's the one who's trying to keep their family together. I love him. I wanted to write a male character in historical fiction that was a really good human and like a good dad, a good husband. I feel like men often get portrayed, negatively in historical fiction. But they can, for good reason, a lot of the time. It makes a lot of sense. And I've written a lot of my historical fiction books have really awful male characters in them. And I just really wanted to just write someone who is truly a good guy. And I love him, he's a great character. My emotional frame of mind when I started writing this book, it was COVID. And we'd been very isolated. I'd been lucky that my kids had actually still been going to school, but there was still just this feeling of isolation. And so I remember feeling, there was like a trapped feeling a little bit at the time, because I usually write in coffee shops out in the world, and I remember feeling a little bit just sort of stuck, and the writing was a bit of an escape. I can always sort of deeply dive into my writing world, and then the external world can fade away. And I remember I have a writing group, and I read the first chapter of the book. It sticks in my mind because we were all outside and we were freezing cold, like around a fire pit, but it was the middle of winter and COVID, and I just remember, like, that whole winter, if you wanted to be with another human, you were outside with them. And so I remember reading this first chapter of this book out in the freezing cold, kind of miserably. A running theme in all of my books, which is completely unintentional and just seems to happen every time, is that someone disappears. There is always a missing, on some level, someone's gone. And it feels like a desperate, tragic loss, not a death per se, but then a pursuit to try to find this person that someone has to do. I have tried to get away from this theme, and I never seem to be able to. And I think that for me personally, my biggest fear is loneliness. When I was a kid, I used to have this reoccurring dream where I would wake up and my house was completely empty. And then I would run out into the street and my town was empty and everyone was gone. And I would wake up with this desperate feeling of loneliness. And I don't know where it comes from, But if anything that I want to surround myself with family all the time, and the thing that makes me feel the most anxious is thinking that people would like leave my life, disappear from my life. So obviously there's something there with why that is always some part of my books. I don't know if I'm working something out, but I feel like it draws me, that idea. So the balance between fiction and real in this book is entirely fiction. The stories and character. There are real characters in it. So Peggy Guggenheim is real, and Man Ray is obviously real. And what they're doing in the book and where they are is all historically accurate. The characters that come into it are fiction. And at the end, a fun thing for me was when the book ends on the coast of Big Sur in 1952. So my grandmother and Juliet and Henry Miller show up in that scene. My mother runs through without a name because she would have been 7 at the time with Henry Miller's children. So they all show up, but you know, the scene itself is fictional. These are just some of the photographs. They're not the originals that we have in the family. This is an example of one that was taken in like an LA studio. It's more of like a glammy shot. And then these were LA. There was like a series of by the pool. I think that, let's see this one. Well, there's so many here. Oh, this is the one, I love this one. This is her also by the pool. And then this is Juliet. This was Man Ray's wife. And there are lots of Juliet pictures. There is this one, which is just an incredibly beautiful photograph of his wife. I don't have the photograph to show you of them masked. The Getty Museum owns these 2 photographs. This is Henry Miller, and this is my grandmother. This is the mask that she is wearing in the photograph with Juliet. It looks like the same mask to me. So there must have been a series of them. And again, I don't know where this was taken. I wonder if it was taken in Big Sur. That looks like stucco, and that's Man Ray's signature in the corner. It says 1945, so that's where we know when that one was done. And then these are just some of the ones that were taken during their time in Big Sur. This is my mom and my grandma. Apparently, the baby pictures of my mother are the only baby pictures Man Ray ever took. This one is sideways, but it's the most incredible photograph of them sitting on a rock in Big Sur. This is where I always wonder what the relationship with these 2 women was, because there are so many intimate photographs of just the 2 of them. This one I love. I can't tell whether they've like staged themselves here. It seems like they're staged, but also could be a spontaneous photograph. Let's see. Some really good ones. Here's one with a self-portrait Man Ray would have done, which clearly they're playing at something. We've made a little staged. He would often set the tripod up and just take, oh, I love this one. Here's another similar, they're like play acting a scene out. I don't know why. And it's fun. I think I'm gonna guess for him, here's another, this is a Man Ray shot, lounging, self-portrait. There's a great one in here of them all. Let's see if I can find it. These are repetitive. Here's another baby picture, my grandmother changing. It's kind of amazing to have like a baby picture of your grandma, like a moment in a family history time taken by such an incredible artist. Well, this one is one of the original Man Ray that we have that's signed, that's considered like an art piece versus a personal snapshot photo of my grandmother. I think it's called Death Mask. I always just thought it was called Mask, but some versions of this, her face is very white, and so it looks, I feel like that's the version he wanted. These are just other sort of glammy shots of my grandmother. This one, there's some examples of his sort of use of like printing. I think he printed it. I'm not sure how you, as a photographer, would know how he's done the white but these are also a picture of her. This is one of my mom and my grandmother, one of the sort of unusual baby shots. And then just these last 2 are, there's this version of this one. And then this. The reason I think people should read this book, A Promise to Arlette, is just for joy, for fun. I feel like the only thing, if my book has consumed a reader and they are totally lost in it and enjoying themselves, that's really all I can ask for. If an extra bonus is that you learn something, or you're intrigued with the art, or you're intrigued with the war, or the facts are interesting for you to learn, like that's just an extra